I met the love of my life on a holiday. We spent a night together and went our separate ways, but when I flew home, I saw her in the airport standing right beside me. At the time, I was recently divorced from my wife Clara, who was cheating on me with 3 different men, and I decided to go on a solo trip around the world to bring adventure into my life. Just as luck would have it, I bumped into Clara at the airport with some guy. Well, it was in my very last city that I once again bumped into someone, but this time, it wasn't Clara. It was a gorgeous middle-aged woman with silky hair, and I spilt my pint all over her dress. I expected her to yell at me, but she didn't. "You know, if you weren't so handsome, I'd be really mad right now," were her exact words. I couldn't believe a woman so beautiful called me handsome, so I offered her a drink to apologize. That night with her was perfect. She made me feel worthy of love again. We went back to my hotel room, but when I woke up, she was gone. She'd left a note, explaining that she has feelings for me, but cannot fall in love with a man she met on holiday. I was defeated, and that day boarded my flight home. I got off the airplane, and while waiting for my luggage, I spotted something. It was her. She was here, literally 80 feet away from me. I walked up to her and spoke to her, and she was just as shocked to see me. She later revealed where in the city she lived, and it was only a few doors down from me. Seeing her in the baggage claim area of our home airport felt like some kind of joke. We both laughed at the absurdity of it. How we never shared with each other where we lived during our night together was wild, but bumping into each other was comically absurd. Out of all the people in all the cities, we lived just a few doors down from each other. It felt like one of those stories you hear that people tell at weddings about how fate or destiny brought them together. Except, this was my life now, and I didn't really believe in that sort of thing, not after what had happened with Clara, but something about seeing her again made me want to believe. After we both collected our bags, we decided to share a cab home. We started talking. I learned that she was into art. She mentioned how Prague had been a dream destination for her because of its architecture and museums. I could tell she was passionate about it, but she didn't say much about what she did for a living. I kept my own story vague. I told her I'd needed a break from everything back home, that Prague had been a kind of escape for me. I didn't go into detail about Jenna or the divorce, just mentioned that life had been tough lately. She didn't press, and I was grateful for that. She mentioned she was trying to make some changes in her life, get out more, meet new people, and find a balance between work and everything else. I could relate to that. As the cab neared her place, we both watched the city lights pass by. When we finally pulled up to her building, she told me to call her and gave me her number. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about her. I found myself reaching for my phone more than once. I wanted to text her, but did not know what to say. It was strange. I barely knew her, but I felt this connection with her that I couldn't explain. And maybe that was just because she was the first person who'd made me feel something other than pain in a long time. But whatever it was, I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to see her again. Finally, after a few days of debating with myself, I texted her. I asked her if she wanted to grab coffee sometime, and her response was almost immediately. She said she'd love to, and asked if I was busy the next morning. I hadn't been a morning person in years. Clara used to joke about how I was a permanent night owl, but for her, I'd make an exception. The next morning, I met her at a little coffee shop near our neighborhood. She was already there when I arrived. She was sitting by the window with a cup of tea in her hands. She looked up and smiled when she saw me, and just like that, the nerves I'd been feeling all morning vanished. I asked to join her, and we talked for a while about work, life, and our shared love of travel. The conversation flowed easily, and it felt like no time had passed at all since Prague. But as the conversation went on, I started to realize just how different our lives were. She was a morning person, for one. She woke up at 5:30 a.m. every day, did yoga, went for a run, and then started her workday by 8:30. She ate clean, worked out regularly, and had a strict routine that she followed religiously. I was the complete opposite. I liked to sleep in, eat whatever I felt like, and my idea of exercise was taking the stairs instead of the elevator. But despite our differences, I found myself drawn to her even more. Over the next few weeks, we started seeing each other more often. We'd go for coffee, grab dinner, or just hang out at one of our apartments. And the more time I spent with her, the more I started to fall for her. She was everything I didn't know I needed. She was funny, smart, caring, and driven. But as we got closer, those differences between us started to become more clear. It started with little things, like when she'd invite me to join her for a morning run, and I'd laugh it off, saying I wasn't a morning person, or when she'd suggest we cook a healthy dinner together, and I'd joke about ordering takeout instead. At first, it was just playful banter, but as time went on, I could tell it was starting to bother her. One weekend, she invited me to a wellness retreat she was attending. She was really excited about it, saying it would be good for both of us to disconnect, recharge, and focus on our health. But I had already made plans with some friends to go to a party that weekend. This was a rare chance to catch up with people I hadn't seen since the divorce. You know how hard it is as an adult to get all your friends' schedules to line up for a weekend. When I told her I couldn't go, she looked disappointed but didn't say anything. The weekend came, and I went to the party. I tried to have fun, but all I could think about was her. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd let her down and that I should have gone to the retreat with her instead. But I brushed it off and convinced myself that it was fine. I didn't feel like we had to do everything together. When I got back from the party, she was waiting for me at my apartment. She looked upset, and I knew something was wrong. She said we needed to talk. She sat me down and told me how she felt, and that our differences were starting to weigh on her. She said she loved spending time with me, but it felt like we were living in two different worlds. She was focused on health, wellness, and structure, while I was more laid back, spontaneous, and carefree. She said she didn't know if we could make it work since we were so different. I felt a pit in my stomach as she spoke. I knew she was right, but I didn't want to lose her. I tried to reassure her, telling her that our differences didn't matter and that we could find a way to make it work, but she shook her head. I could see the tears forming in her eyes. She said she was sorry and that she couldn't continue seeing me anymore. And just like that, it was over. She left, and I was alone again, feeling even worse than before. I had found someone who made me happy again, and now I'd lost her because I couldn't get my act together. The next few days were a blur. I didn't eat, didn't sleep. I just kept replaying our conversations over and over in my head, wondering where it all went wrong. I knew I had to do something to make it right, so I made a decision. I was going to change, if not for her, for myself. I had to prove to her that I was the man for her. The following days, I started waking up earlier. I forced myself out of bed before the sun came up. I joined a gym and started working out regularly. I even started cooking healthier meals instead of ordering takeout. I was not the best cook starting out, but it was edible. It was tough, and there were days when I wanted to give up, but I kept going. I wanted to show her that I was serious about making it work. After a few weeks, I reached out to her again. I sent her a message, telling her how much I missed her and how I was trying to make changes. I didn't expect a response, but to my surprise, she replied within a few hours. She told me that she missed me too and asked if we could talk. My heart leaped with joy at that text, and I immediately made arrangements. We met up for coffee again, and I could tell she was surprised by the changes I'd made. She listened as I told her about my new routine, about how I was trying to be better. She smiled, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. We talked for a long time that day, and by the end of it, we both agreed to give it another shot. We knew it wouldn't be easy, but we were willing to try. We set some ground rules. She said she'd cut me some slack on the early mornings, and I'd make more of an effort to join her in her healthy habits. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. For a while, things were great. We found a rhythm that worked for both of us, and it felt like we were stronger than ever. But then, just when I thought we'd figured it all out, she dropped a bombshell on me. One evening, over dinner, she told me she'd accepted a job offer in another city, 4 hours away from here. It was a huge opportunity for her, something she'd been working toward for years, but she hadn't talked to me about it before making the decision. She told the recruiter that she would start within the next few weeks. I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. I couldn't believe she'd made such a huge decision without even discussing it. It felt like she was just going to leave me behind, and that everything we'd been working toward didn't matter in her eyes. I changed so much for her, and now she is going to pursue her dreams. I didn't want to be selfish, but I couldn't help but feel hurt knowing she'd drop everything that we built together. I didn't know what to say. I just sat there, staring at her, trying to process what she'd just told me. Finally, she broke the silence. She apologized and realized that she should have talked to me about it first, and explained that she didn't want to hold herself back. I understood where she was coming from. I knew how important her career was to her, but it still hurt. I felt like I wasn't even a factor in her decision, and she didn't care if I was part of her future or not. But as much as it hurt, I knew I couldn't let this be the end of us. We'd already been through so much together, and I wasn't ready to give up on her. So, I swallowed my pride and told her how I felt. I told her that I wanted to support her, but needed to know where we stood. She started crying, and it broke my heart to see her like that. She told me she was sorry, that she hadn't meant to hurt me, and that she wanted to find a way to make it work. We talked it through, and by the end of the night, we both agreed that we didn't want to lose each other. It wasn't easy, but we figured out a plan. We decided to do long distance for a while, see how things went, and then reevaluate. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than the alternative. As we talked, I realized just how much she meant to me. She wasn't just someone I cared about. She was the person I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. So, I decided to take a leap of faith. truth. A few months after her move, I planned a surprise trip to Prague. I wanted to take her back to the place where it all started, where we'd first met. It felt like the perfect way to show her how much she meant to me and to remind us both of the connection we'd shared from the very beginning. On the last night of our trip, I took her back to that little bar where we'd first met. We ordered drinks, and as we sat there, reminiscing about our first encounter, I felt my heart pounding in my chest. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the ring I'd been carrying with me. Her eyes widened as I got down on one knee, and for a moment, I thought I might pass out. I poured my love out to her. I told her that I never believed in fate before I met her, but I do now. She'd changed my life in ways I never thought possible, and I couldn't imagine my future without her. She looked at me with her hands over her mouth. I asked her to marry me, and before I could fully get it out, she screamed yes. I slipped the ring onto her finger, and she threw her arms around me, laughing and crying at the same time. I felt like I was on top of the world. We spent the rest of the night celebrating, talking about our future, and making plans for the life we wanted to build together. It wasn't going to be easy, and we both knew that, but we also knew that we were stronger together than we were apart.